Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a really fascinating analysis here of Japan for 2026. It's a deep dive taken straight from a major travel series, and it's really trying to answer that one big question for you, the traveler. Is Japan in 2026 actually worth all the hype?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the mission today. Our sources, they've really put together this profile focusing hard on the sheer contrast that defines Japan, this constant, almost dramatic tension between its deep ancient traditions and, well, some of the most cutting-edge futuristic stuff on the planet.
Yeah.
So for you, the listener, we're basically distilling all of that, the geographical insights, those cultural nuances, and importantly, the practical travel tips you really need, just so you can get a clear picture of how viable, how enriching a trip in 2026 could actually be.
I find it so interesting that the sources frame it through this duality right from the get-go. Like, you have this incredible dedication to perfection. Think of a sushi master, honing a technique for centuries, quiet artistry. And then, bam, it's set against this backdrop of a vast, ultra-modern, neon-drenched city sprawl. So the big question this whole analysis circles around is, how does Japan, this land of, ancient temples and soaring skyscrapers, actually manage that balance between its huge cultural legend and the reality of being a modern global destination that, frankly, everyone wants to visit now?
And what's really illuminating is that the sources aren't just like describing geography. They're defining an experience, a cognitive experience that's rooted in that contrast. You can find yourself in this timeless natural beauty, like a really serene, preserved forest. And then literally minutes later, you step right into the kinetic, almost overwhelming energy of a global megacity. That duality, that friction, it is modern Japanese life. And understanding that is probably the crucial first step to planning a trip that feels successful, not just overwhelming.
And when we talk about that kinetic energy, we definitely have to talk about the big urban players. The analysis straight away defines the two main cities that kind of anchor the country's travel profile. So you've got Tokyo, pegged as the ultimate futuristic megacity.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, there's Osaka, which the analysis calls kind of affectionately the nation's kitchen.
And that comparison is absolutely critical, especially if your time is limited, right?
Yeah.
Tokyo is described as this electric blend. It's vast, it's sprawling, maybe a bit daunting, sure, but it delivers pretty much everything. High culture, pure spectacle, you name it. Osaka, on the other hand, is presented as having this really distinct, focused, and importantly, immediately approachable vibe. So if you only have time for one massive city, decided between Tokyo's sheer scope and Osaka's focused energy and approachability,
Right.
well, that's probably the first big decision you'll make.
Okay, let's jump right into Tokyo then. The sources paint this incredibly vivid picture, this electric blend of ultra-modern and traditional. But what really comes through, I think, is the sheer, almost overwhelming energy of the place.
It's totally defined by motion, isn't it? When you look at the ultra-modern side, those iconic sites really capture that global energy. We're talking about Shibuya Crossing, which is, more than just a big intersection. It's this world-recognized symbol of connectivity, of controlled chaos, handling hundreds of thousands of people every day.
Right, it's mesmerizing.
It is. And then you've got Akihabara, the high-tech hub. It started as an electronics district, but now it's the absolute epicenter for otaku culture. Multi-story arcades, themed cafes, tiny shops packed with electronic parts. It's like the physical manifestation of Japan's relationship with technology and maybe escapism.
But the amazing thing about Tokyo, as the sources point out, is how seamlessly these hyper-modern hubs blend with deep history. You have these really essential historic counterpoints that give you a needed mental break from all the neon. The analysis points specifically to the tranquility you find at Meiji Shrine. It's this huge, surprisingly dense green space, like a lung right in the middle of the city. And then there's the historic significance of Asakusa, home to the ancient Sensoji Temple.
And that contrast, it's essential for your sanity as a traveler, honestly. You can spend your morning, and you probably should just immersed in the quiet, the stillness of those towering cedar trees at Meiji Jingu, this really revered national space. And then transition straight into the sensory overload of somewhere like Shinjuku or Akihabara in the afternoon. But that sprawling nature, it does present logistical challenges. The sources are very clear. Navigating this sprawling city takes some prep. The transit system is legendary for being on time, sure.
Yeah.
But the sheer scale of the network means accessibility for you in 2026 really relies on using technology effectively.
And this is where that 2026 angle gets really specific, right? The sources emphasize that new tech and maybe specific cultural events happening that year could really influence travel decisions, even accessibility. What kind of tech shifts are they actually talking about?
Well, the focus seems to be on making things easier, mitigating the overwhelm. Because of the sheer volume of international visitors, the sources talk about the rapid rollout of advanced, maybe AI-driven navigation systems, especially in those huge subway and rail hubs. They're designed specifically to help with language barriers and finding complex routes.
Okay.
We're talking enhanced translation tech, often built into city guides or digital signs. Moving beyond just static translations to something more contextual, more real-time. These kinds of innovations are pretty crucial for turning what could be an overwhelming experience into an efficient one.
That makes sense.
And also, if there's a major tech expo or, maybe a specific high-profile national celebration plan for 2026, those events are going to concentrate demand for hotels and potentially really impact transport availability. So being aware of the calendar is definitely part of using the city's resources well.
Okay, so let's shift from that controlled chaos and tech marvel of Tokyo to what the sources call the urban alternative, Osaka. This city has a really distinct identity, known less for its massive scale and more for its direct, vibrant food culture, earning it that name, the nation's kitchen.
And that name isn't just marketing fluff, it's like a cultural reality. Tokyo offers amazing global dining, high-end, precise stuff. But Osaka, it offers the soul of local Japanese cooking, often enjoyed right there on the street.
Sounds good already.
Yeah. The sources dive right into the specific highlights, which are totally intertwined with the city's identity. You've got okonomiyaki and that savory, customizable pancake thing, often cooked right at your table. So the meal itself becomes this interactive social event.
Oh, nice.
And of course, takoyaki, those amazing little hot wheat flour balls, usually filled with octopus, served steaming hot from street vendors, especially in areas like Dotonbori. The appeal is absolutely rooted in this vibrant, accessible street food culture that just permeates the whole city. It's not confined to fancy districts.
That sounds immediately more, well, accessible, both financially and maybe socially too. Beyond just the food, though, what else do the sources say about Osaka's general vibe and, its viability as a destination?
Well, beyond the incredible food, Osaka has some other strong draws. It's known for having a genuinely lively nightlife. It's a city with a real sense of humor, a warmth, often contrasting with the maybe more reserved feel of Tokyo sometimes.
Interesting.
The analysis keeps mentioning this general, approachable vibe, and that's not just about people being friendly, it's also about the layout. Osaka feels denser, less spread out than Tokyo, which can make getting around easier and faster for shorter trips. And locals seem perhaps more accustomed to immediate, casual interaction. It feels less anonymous than that sprawling giant to the east.
Okay, so this leads naturally to that provocative travel question the sources bring up. Is Osaka a viable substitute for Tokyo on a trip, or do you really need to see both?
The answer seems to depend entirely on your priorities as a traveler. If your main goal is deep culinary immersion, a really energetic but socially relaxed atmosphere, and easy access to great street life, then yeah, Osaka could be a phenomenal choice, maybe even superior for that specific focus.
Right.
The pros are clearly the amazing food scene, that approachable ease, and probably lower immediate travel stress. The cons, though, are mostly about scale and the sheer volume of traditional landmarks. Tokyo just offers a wider breadth of globally famous sites like the Imperial Palace grounds and that massive, unrivaled scale of urban experience, museums, theaters, distinct neighborhoods.
So it's a trade-off.
It's a trade-off. Choosing Osaka means prioritizing focused, high-quality, delicious engagement over the kind of overwhelming breadth and complexity that maybe only Tokyo can deliver. The sources seem to conclude that for a traveler seeking immersion rather than just ticking boxes, Osaka is highly viable.
Definitely. Okay, so if Tokyo is the future and Osaka is the kitchen, then Kyoto. Kyoto is undeniably the spiritual anchor, right? We're moving now to the heart of Japan's history. The sources define Kyoto as the nation's cultural soul, a city literally defined by its heritage. We're talking over 1,000 Buddhist temples, stunning Zen gardens, those historic, often quite secluded geisha districts.
Kyoto is that quintessential postcard image of old Japan. And its importance on an itinerary, especially for first-timers, is almost non-negotiable. But that very popularity, as the sources really dig into, has created this acute central tension, what they call the preservation dilemma.
Right. Let's get into the specifics of that dilemma because the critique we saw said we needed more detail here. What exactly are the preservation efforts being balanced against the reality of mass tourism?
It's a profound conflict, and it's very material. The sources detail how Kyoto struggles constantly to manage the sheer volume of visitors, which, brings in essential money against the immediate physical damage and, maybe more subtly, the cultural erosion caused by that volume. Specific measures mentioned include things like time slot booking systems for some of the most famous temples, like Kinkakuji, the Golden Pavilion, just to cap the number of people going through at any one time. There are also really localized efforts, especially in the Jian district, to protect the private residential areas.
How so?
Well, for example, certain narrow alleyways are now restricted, off limits to tourists, basically to maintain the quiet and privacy needed for the remaining Gaiko and Maiko to actually live and work. It's trying to balance the desire to see the culture with the need for that culture to actually survive and function day to day.
Okay, that makes sense. And this leads directly to that common concern for you listening.
Mhm.
With such massive crowds, do they just overshadow the intrinsic calming beauty the city is supposed to offer? If you're going there seeking that authentic tranquility, does the sheer number of people just defeat the purpose?
That is the most crucial question for an authentic experience. It truly is. Because if you're standing in a magnificent Zen garden, but you're literally shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of other people all trying to get the same photo, well, the core purpose of that garden meditation, calm, is completely lost.
Yeah, it's gone.
It's gone. The sources conclude that the crowds can and often do overshadow the experience if you just followed the standard tourist routes between, say, 9 a.m. and 4 p.m.
So, how do the sources suggest travelers navigate this then? What's the strategy for finding those off the beaten path spots to try and ensure a more intimate experience despite all the tourism?
The solution they propose is highly strategic and, frankly, it requires some dedication from the traveler. The sources emphasize extreme flexibility and, crucially, timing. This means things like getting up well before dawn to visit super famous sites like Fushimi-Inari Taisha,
Yeah.
the shrine with thousands of red gates before the main tour buses even roll in.
Okay, early starts.
Early starts. And it also means actively seeking out the lesser-known, smaller neighborhood temples. Kyoto is just littered with hundreds of profound, intimate little places that don't have the big parking lots and souvenir shops of the mega temples. Finding these takes a bit more research, sure, but is how you can still find that deep sense of stillness Kyoto promises.
But wait, if everyone starts focusing heavily on these off the beaten path spots, isn't there a risk of just decentralizing the crowds and maybe overwhelming smaller communities or temples that aren't equipped for high volume? Did the sources address that sort of ethical trade-off?
That's a really salient point, yeah. And the analysis does touch on this ethical challenge. The recommendation isn't simply go anywhere else randomly, but rather to patronize smaller local businesses respectfully and to be hyper-aware of noise, photographic etiquette, especially when you realize you're in or near residential areas.
Right. Be mindful.
Exactly. The burden of preservation is kind of shifting, and the successful 2026 traveler needs to recognize their own footprint immediately. It's about trying to distribute the economic benefit without shattering the peace. It's a delicate tightrope walk, for sure. #tag Hokkaido, the appeal of pristine nature.
Okay, let's shift gears now, geographically and conceptually. We're moving from the densely packed urban and historic centers way up north to the vast island of Hokkaido. This really showcases the incredible geographic scope of Japan, moving from that tightly controlled culture to massive, pristine nature.
Yeah, Hokkaido is Japan's answer for anyone seeking true wilderness, wide open space, and really dramatic seasonal changes. Its main appeal is just the sheer volume of pristine nature. This ranges from, like, the spectacular flower fields in summer, especially those famous lavender fields near Furano, creating these incredible colorful landscapes.
Oh, I've seen pictures. Amazing.
They are, right through to its world-famous winter ski resorts, known globally for that incredible powder snow. It's an area really defined by rugged, almost untamed beauty.
And the sources briefly mention some unique, maybe lesser-known cultural experiences there too. Given that its focus is so much on nature, what might those cultural aspects involve?
Well, while nature definitely dominates, Hokkaido does have a unique cultural identity, partly because of its relative isolation and its history. Crucially, it's the ancestral home of the Ainu people, the indigenous population of Japan.
Right.
Historically, they were heavily marginalized. But the analysis notes a growing effort, one that's becoming more visible to travelers, to acknowledge and promote Ainu culture, history, and crafts. You see this in specific museums and cultural centers, especially near cities like Sapporo or in places like Shirai. This offers a really distinct cultural perspective, totally different from what you find on the main island of Honshu.
That's really interesting.
And the food scene is distinct too, heavily focused on amazing seafood, high-quality dairy. Hokkaido is famous for dairy, and generally heartier food reflecting that northern climate.
Let's talk about the evolution of the area then. The sources mention Hokkaido is evolving with sustainable tourism efforts. What does that actually mean for a traveler in 2026? What does sustainable tourism look like in that context?
This is a pretty major insight, yeah.
Hmm.
It suggests a move towards maybe higher value, lower impact tourism. Sustainable tourism in Hokkaido seems to mean visible efforts to preserve that fragile, almost subarctic wilderness. The sources cite examples like implementing strictly regulated hiking paths, especially in national parks like Shirotoko, to prevent erosion and minimize disturbance to wildlife.
Okay, so more controls.
More controls, yeah. And also, some high-end ski resorts are apparently pioneering efforts in carbon offsetting and really focusing on local sourcing for their operations, aiming for almost neutral environmental footprints. For you, the traveler, this means the experience might be more focused on quality interaction with nature, think smaller group tours, dedicated eco-friendly lodges or hotels, ensuring that the incredible environment you traveled all that way to see remains protected for future visits.
All right, now we get intensely practical. Japan's event calendar is world famous, and its seasonality, well, it profoundly influences everything about travel crowds, costs, what you can even do. This is where planning hits reality hard.
Exactly. The sources are really clear. Peak events define the travel seasons, and they absolutely define the prices. You've got the ephemeral but truly breathtaking beauty of the cherry blossoms, the sakura. It's a phenomenon so globally desired that it causes massive spikes in travel costs and crowds. And because the bloom date is unpredictable and the peak viewing only lasts about a week, timing is everything.
Wow, just a week.
Just about, yeah. And then you have the dramatic winter draws like the Sapporo Snow Festival up in Hokkaido, where these enormous ice sculptures completely transform the city.
So the mission here for the listener is to highlight the must-see events for 2026, but also give some actionable advice on how to experience them authentically without just getting swept away by the masses.
Right. Actionable advice for Sakura, according to the sources, is basically twofold: flexibility and regional strategy. Since the bloom generally moves north across the country, travelers are advised to monitor the official cherry blossom forecast almost obsessively.
Okay, keep checking.
Definitely. And instead of just competing for crowded spots in the main city parks, the sources suggest looking for regional spots, maybe temples known for weeping cherry trees just outside the main centers, or combining the bloom viewing with things like late-night illuminations, which often draw smaller crowds. For huge events like the Snow Festival, honestly, booking accommodation and transport 8 to 12 months in advance is pretty much necessary. The local infrastructure just can't handle last-minute surges.
Wow, that far ahead. Okay. This feeds right into the need to understand how seasonality really shapes travel plans. It's way more complex than just checking the weather forecast, isn't it?
Oh, significantly more complex. Seasonality dictates crowd levels the sources really stress, avoiding Golden Week, that cluster of holidays in late April, early May. Pretty much the entire country travels then, and prices go through the roof.
Good tip.
It also dictates what activities are even available. For instance, the famous autumn foliage viewing, Koyo, also creates a travel peak, needing similar booking strategies to Sakura. And interestingly, the sources identify some new cultural trends that seem to be influencing tourism in 2026. It implies the standard seasonal flow might be getting a bit more fragmented.
Tell us more about those shifting trends then. The critique we saw at our previous discussion was a bit vague. What specifics are the sources flagging about new tourist interests? What's changing?
Well, the trends seem to point towards people seeking depth over just breadth. We're apparently seeing a big increase in interest in regional culinary tours that deliberately avoid Tokyo and Osaka, focusing instead on places like Fukuoka for its famous ramen, or specialized sake breweries way up in Niigata.
Okay, more niche.
Exactly. And there's also a distinct surge in visitors looking for hands-on traditional craft workshops, things like pottery classes, indigo dyeing experiences, maybe even katana forging demonstrations. These are inherently small group, low-volume experiences. These trends allow travelers to find really significant value and immersion during the shoulder seasons like late spring or early autumn or in small cities.
Yeah.
It's starting to shift that traditional peak tourist flow away from just the famous seasonal blooms.
Now, for the segment that really dictates reality for most people, addressing the practical financial questions every listener is asking, Is Japan just prohibitively expensive in 2026? How do I manage my budget?
Right. The sources tackle this head on. They basically confirm Japan is a mid to high cost destination globally, yeah.
Where?
But careful planning does offer significant ways to save money. We could look at the cost breakdown they provide. Accommodation is confirmed as the biggest chunk of the budget, especially those high-end international hotels in central Tokyo and Kyoto. Room rates there have seen steady increases. Transport is usually the second major cost, followed by food. However, food costs can be radically managed. If you rely on quality local options, street markets, even convenience store fare, which is surprisingly high quality in Japan, your food budget can become highly manageable.
So, what specific strategies for saving money, for maximizing that travel budget, are highlighted?
The key seems to be strategic trade-offs. To manage accommodation costs, travelers are advised to maybe prioritize booking local business hotels or staying slightly outside the absolute city center hubs, maybe using local rail lines for a slightly longer commute each day.
Makes sense.
For food, the strategy is embracing the local, actively seeking out set lunch menus, finding local ramen or gyozaps rather than always defaulting to tourist-focused restaurants. But the most critical financial leverage point, the one requiring immediate attention for 2026 planning, relates to transport.
Ah, yes, the crucial update, the Japan Rail Pass. The sources flag this as essential, implying changes that really alter the financial maths for anyone planning a multi-city trip. What exactly are those changes?
This is the absolute must-know detail. The analysis confirms a recent, very significant structural change to the JR Pass system. Specifically, the sources point to an approximate 70% price increase for the standard 7-day national pass.
70%?
Yeah, 70. It's a massive hike, and it fundamentally shifts the value proposition. Historically, the pass was almost an automatic win, budget-wise, for anyone doing, say, a round trip between Tokyo and Kyoto, Osaka.
Right, you just bought it.
You just bought it. Post-hike, the sources conclude that for many, maybe even most travelers now, purchasing individual bullet train, Shinkansen tickets, or perhaps utilizing regional rail passes, which are still pretty cost-effective for specific areas, becomes a more sensible and often cheaper strategy. Travelers must meticulously calculate if their specific itinerary actually justifies the cost of the national pass now. You can't just assume it's the best deal anymore.
That is a complete game changer. It means you need to be ready to pivot your whole transport strategy based on your exact route, not just rely on the old playbook.
Precisely. It demands a level of itinerary engineering, of calculation that wasn't really required before. But beyond the wallet and the calendar, there's the matter of cultural interface. The sources strongly insist that knowing some crucial local etiquette is necessary for smooth and respectful travel.
It really seems like respect is just non-negotiable for having a positive experience in Japan. What are the specific etiquette points they emphasize?
Etiquette in Japan is just deeply woven into everyday interactions, and the sources highlight several non-negotiables. Paramount among these is public conduct specifically, avoiding loud phone calls or music on trains. That expectation of quiet on public transport is really high.
Okay, keep it down.
Keep it down. Cash handling is also key.
Yeah.
You generally don't hand money directly to a person. You use the little tray provided. That's quite important. And also, the nuances of visiting temples and shrines, like the purification rituals before entering, being mindful about photography in restricted areas, those are vital. Travelers who put in just that small effort to learn these basics will likely find a much warmer, smoother reception from their Japanese hosts. #Outreka.
Wow. Okay, so we've navigated the tech sprawl of Tokyo, we've tasted the culinary heartbeat of Osaka, explored that preservation tightrope walk in Kyoto, and even experienced the sustainable wilderness way up in Hokkaido. Synthesizing all these geographical, cultural, logistical findings, the sources seem to deliver a pretty clear final verdict on viability, don't they?
They do. And that verdict is a resounding yes. Japan is profoundly worth the journey for 2026 travelers. It absolutely requires strategy more than ever, perhaps, but the rewards are immense. The sources kind of characterize the ideal traveler for Japan now as someone who really appreciates cultural depth, who embraces innovation, and who is actively seeking those contrasts. Someone adaptable, curious about that friction between the ancient and the futuristic.
It really is the ultimate destination of contrasts, isn't it? It just reemphasizes that dual nature, a place waiting to be explored both through its huge, iconic, high-energy experiences like Shibuya Crossing, and by proactively seeking out those quiet, intimate, off-the-beaten-track locations we talked about, particularly maybe around Kyoto or throughout Hokkaido.
Yeah, the traveler who just sticks to the main checklist. They run a pretty high risk of sensory overload, getting stuck in crowds, and maybe disappointment due to those inflated costs, especially with the JR Pass change. The really successful 2026 traveler, the sources suggest, is one who actively engineers contrast into their itinerary, moving seamlessly, respectfully, between the electric city and the profound stillness of the preserved countryside or smaller towns.
So what is this aggressive push towards sustainable tourism we saw in Hokkaido, coupled with this heavy reliance on technology like AI navigation in Tokyo to manage tourist flow? What does that truly mean for the experience of the future traveler? Here's a final thought for you to consider as you wrap up this deep dive. If Japan successfully uses its new tech and sustainable efforts to manage the tourist flow and that preservation dilemma in 2026, does that fundamentally change the authentic experience? Does it maybe make it too curated, too managed?
Or does this management simply ensure that the ancient culture remains viable, protected, accessible even for future generations of curious travelers? Kind of makes you wonder, right, whether the authentic experience of tomorrow is actually one that is carefully managed and facilitated. It forces us to ask if maybe preservation can only truly happen through some form of controlled engagement now.
A lot to think about there.
Definitely. We hope this deep dive is giving you the foundational, specific knowledge you need to start planning your own, highly customized, richly detailed journey into this incredible land where tradition truly does meet tomorrow.